They said something about like they're not allowed to have
How's everyone doing tonight? All right. So tonight, our guest speaker is none other than our very own Terry Wardrop. Terry came to St. Paul's in the fall of 1983, I believe. To give you an idea of what was going on in 1983, the average price of a home was $82,000. Microsoft Word was first introduced. ARPANET changed protocols and became what we now call the Internet. Gasoline was 93 cents. Aaron Rodgers, the football player, Mila Kunis, and Chris Hemsworth were all born.
That's a good year.
And Terry Wardrop had hair back then. Terry has been an integral part of the St. Paul's community for 31 years. He is loved for his many talents that include his rock and roll alter ego, often referred to as Wardrop the Beat, or the Dropper, as a monster guitarist, in case you didn't know that. He often plays in Dan Zane's. It's been rumored that Mr. Wardrop dressed up for one Halloween as the man featured in tonight's presentation. Tonight, Mr. Wardrop, I don't know if that's true or not.
I don't know if it is.
Tonight, Mr. Wardrop is going to share with us an obsession of his and the topic of his ongoing research into the amazing life and times of Mr. Alan Turing. Please welcome Mr. Terry Wardrop.
Thank you. I feel a little like Stephen Wright with this, and there's a reason for this. I could just talk, but I'm videoing this, and so I want the sound to be okay, because a huge number of people actually helped me in my research, and so my plan is, once this is done, I'm going to try and post it to the internet and sort of tell everybody out there, essentially to thank them for all the help they gave me, and you'll learn about them as we go through this. One of the things that you didn't hear is I got a degree in computer science in 1978, and my fourth-year project was to create a simulator of a system called a Turing machine simulator. That was my first introduction to Alan Turing and what he did. So essentially it's been that long that I've been thinking about Turing and his life and work. What you're about to see and hear are my opinions, what I've learned about Turing. I think it's correct. I think it's the results of this research, but I don't absolutely guarantee things. I can't do justice to Turing in an hour, so I hope this will just interest you so that you will then go off and learn a lot more about him. I'll show you a little later. There's about to be a movie on his life come out in November. Keira Knightley's in it, so it's a big deal. It's going to be Oscar-worthy. Anyway, so in fact, I'll play the trailer when we get to the end so you get a sense of what's about to happen. So everything you hear here, everything I'm learning is becoming a big deal, even though a group of people have been working on these ideas for a while. So as an example, 2012-2013 in England was known as the Year of Alan Turing. It was the 100th anniversary of his birth. And David Rooney actually created this wonderful thing at the Science Museum in London that was basically about the life and times of Alan Turing. He toured Mary, my wife, in the back there, and I around. We saw this, and he was describing how he set the thing up, and you'll see a lot from that exhibit. A bunch of people to thank. This is a group of people. Because there was the Year of Alan Turing, a whole group got together to plan out the year. And I was able to access that group, ask them for help. Brian Jack Copeland, he's director of the Turing Archive. He's a professor of computer science in New Zealand, but he's essentially one of the foremost experts on Alan Turing. He gave me a lot of assistance. Andrew Hodges, you're going to learn a lot more about in the coming weeks, months, wrote the definitive biography of Alan Turing called The Enigma. He's actually written the book that goes with the movie as well, and it's called one of the 50 top biographies of all time. It's pretty amazing. This gentleman, Bernard Richards, he's still a professor at the University of Manchester. He's in his 80s. He was Alan Turing's last graduate student. I'll tell you a lot about him. I actually got to have dinner with him the last night that I was in England. Also, Patricia McGuire, in charge of the King's College Archives. Brian Mulholland, who's created a reconstruction of the first ever programmable computer at the Museum of Science and Industry in Manchester. David Rooney, Science Museum in London. And David Levy has written about Turing. He's an AI researcher and chess champion, and he just sent me a lot of emails with suggestions. Plugs. So thanks to Mary. This was 1 week ago. Walter Isaacson was interviewed about this new book that came out literally 10 days ago. Called The Innovators. He's the biography of Steve Jobs. That was a big biography a few years ago. And he's now created one called The Innovators, where he talks about Babbage, Lady Lovelace, Alan Turing, and the development of the computer. So he covers pretty much the same stuff I'm going to. I don't agree with a lot of the things he said, but he's done a lot of really good research. Here's the poster from The Imitation Game, the movie that's about to come out. And you can see it says here, Alan Turing, The Enigma by Andrew Hodges. Here's the definitive biography, Alan Turing, The Enigma, and now they've worked on this movie. Here are 2 books by this Jack Copeland from New Zealand. He's written even more books about Turing, about Bletchley Park, and about the various computers that started there. So you'll see a lot of this. So here's my question. Clearly, this is something you really can't have a decent argument about. This is sort of to pique your interest. I think it can be argued he's the most influential person from the 20th century, and here's why I think this. Oh, first of all, here's some other people that I think are almost as important that I think you need to know about. Charles Babbage, Lady Lovelace, Claude Shannon, Max Newman, and Thomas Flowers did some amazing stuff. And these 3 here, you've never heard of, but to me, it's one of the bravest acts of bravery. It saved millions of people's lives, what these guys did. So I'll tell you about that. Okay, basic biography. I'm not going to talk a lot about Turing the person. You can go read about that. He was an eccentric, brilliant, genius. Lots of stories about him, but the basic ideas, he's born in 1912. I'll talk about the way he died, June 7, 1954, at age 41. Lived, worked in London, Cambridge, Bletchley Park, Manchester in England, and he did a lot of work at Princeton and I believe over in Bell Labs. Okay, here's why I think he's the most important. He was the first person to use the term computer to represent an automaton, a system that was performing instructions. He created the design for the first programmable computer. He created a major mathematical proof by defining what's now known as the Turing machine. And it's now acknowledged as the paper that influenced all the computer design pioneers. Without this paper, the theory is people wouldn't have actually thought of, could we create a general purpose machine that can do anything it's told to do? He created a test for intelligence, which my artificial intelligence class knows a lot about. It's called the Turing test. He was actually the first to propose the study of machine intelligence, the subject now known as artificial intelligence, where the usual press is it was started at Dartmouth College in 1956. He actually started the science and proposed it back in 1952. And I love saying this, he won World War II. And now, not completely, but I'm going to give you an argument and you can make your own decisions. In addition, he wrote the first ever programming manual. He was the first ever to create computer-generated music. He basically stuck a speaker onto his computer and had it beep and do some stuff. He was the first to use a computer as a word processor. All your word processing, this guy was the first to actually think, oh, I can type on this and print stuff out and give it to people. He wrote the first chess playing program. He developed theories of morphogenesis, how our biological systems actually use mathematical functions to grow. He actually figured out how the spots on the side of a cow are actually drawn. So essentially started a new science called morphogenesis. And he developed an encoded speech transmission system after doing the code debugging, and between 43 and 46, Churchill and Roosevelt actually had conversations across the Atlantic using this system. How did he do it? Here's my thesis. I believe Turing, he was unique. He was the right man at the right place at the right time because of 3 progressions that happened to coincide right around the late 30s. So first is how technology was developing, and I'll go through that. Then the progression of mathematical concepts and algorithms. And finally, there was this crucible of World War II where all of this came together. So I'll start with technology. So to start, we go back to the 1600s. One of my favorite people, Blaise Pascal, he created, when he was 19 years old, a calculating engine. And you can see it over here. These are little telephone dials. His father was in charge of the French tax collection system. And he had buildings full of people who added numbers together, and they added them badly. And so Pascal decided he would make a system that his father could use so people could do their additions without making errors. So this, again, at the British Museum, this thing was in place. So it could do additions, and you could put in multiple numbers and add them up. In the early 1800s, the Jacquard loom became a calculating system. It was the first one to actually use these punch cards that are strung together with string. And these would go through the loom, and the different hole patterns would define how the loom did its weaving. Here's a close-up. So you can see the string holding these things together, and you can see the holes punched. This next slide will blow you away. That is Jacquard. That's a portrait of Jacquard. It's woven. So there were 24,000 of those punch cards used to create that woven portrait of Jacquard. So that's sort of the technology of the time. That's how good it was. So on to the Science Museum. There's a whole thing on Babbage. This is a gentleman who built calculating engines, or proposed them, back in the late 1800s. That's half of his brain there, if you want to see that. So he constantly would propose new calculating engines that were going to be steam-powered and created out of clockwork. And essentially, they never worked. The technology of the clockwork wasn't good enough for what he wanted. So he'd create something, it wouldn't work, but then he'd get an idea for an even more grandiose system, and he would work on that. So I have 2 videos just of me at the museum going around this stuff. So here there's the analytical engine and the difference engine. So here we go.
Here's Babbage's difference engine number 1. So designed by Babbage, built by Clement, and it never worked. But people say that based on the design, that it actually could have worked. Let's get up close so you can see the handle on the top to turn, all the gears, and then you can see all the dials that can be set all the way down. The wheels at the bottom. Here's the world's first difference engine. Didn't build a full one, but this was built. Then went on to design and propose the analytical engine. Here are the cards that could be used to program it. And here is difference engine number 2 that was actually finished in 1991. Actually run. Difference engine number 2. You can see all the clockwork number dials. Input section on one side, and they just added a 4,000 part output section based on his design.